Hello everybody, and welcome to my deck tech of Golos, the Tireless Pilgrim. This deck is a Landfall deck, themed around playing more than one land a turn, getting triggers off of playing those lands, and getting value from that way. So I'm just going to run through the breakdown of my deck, what kind of cards I play, why I play them, and the kind of categories that I have the deck separated out into. For starters, start with lands, because it is a landfall deck. I do have all 10 of the fetches in the deck. The reason I do so is because you play one, you get a landfall trigger. Play another one, you get another landfall trigger. So it helps you rack up the landfall triggers fast, as well as being able to find your colors, which can be important later. You definitely want to run into green and white, because green and white are the two most important colors in the deck. And when you have all those lands, you definitely want to be able to have stuff to fetch. You don't want to run out of fetchable lands. So I do run 10 dual lands. Don't have the other two yet. And I also run the green, white, black triome, as those are the three most heavily represented colors in my deck. I play these because when you want to activate Golos, which isn't a super important theme in the deck, but is something you can do later to gain card advantage. Like I said, you don't want to run out of fetchable cards, so I also run 2 of each basic, with the exception of forests. I run 3. Like I said, green and white are the most important colors in the deck. Green obviously being the most important, as is most traditional landfall decks. With the triome, the 10 duals, and the 11 basics, I have 22 fetchable lands. And that's important because in some games, if you only draw 1 fetch land, you actually can run out of targets to hit with your fetch. So keeping that number high is important. Up next, we just have a couple of lands that are not basics or fetchables. But they are just good cards to have. Command Tower, 5-color deck. It's one of the best lands. We have the Onslaught Cycle lands. These are great ways to cycle if you have too many lands and you want some cards instead. They synergize well by cycling them, playing them with a Crucible of Worlds effect later. You draw 2 cards if you have a Gitrog monster in play. They're also great ways to protect your life from the loam if someone goes to exile your graveyard while your life from the loam is in there. Some of the other utility lands that I run in the deck, Bojuka Bog, that's just a good card to have. Coming into play tapped versus being able to exile someone's graveyard is usually always worth it, even if you're just stopping them from Eternal Witnessing back like a Selvala Stampede. It's usually worth the price of coming into play tapped. I play Urborg. I don't have Cabal Coffers in the deck, however, it just makes all your lands universally black, which is nice. It also helps you because you do sometimes get most of your lands out of your deck in a game, and this makes it so that your fetch lands will tap for mana as well. I play Strip Mine. I don't aggressively use it, even though it is an option. You can get out to pretty fast starts with this deck. It's very aggressive, and you know, if you get an extra land and a Crucible set up, you can strip people out of the game. It's not traditionally how I play, but it's mostly there to stop, get rid of enemy wastelands, as well as other cards that can. There's a land that exiles your graveyard if you sack a desert. Cards like that, if you're trying to go off with a big landfall turn before that happens. It's mostly there for protection. I do play 1 bounce land, Selesnya Sanctuary. Green-white's the most important color in the deck, so that's why I've chosen the Selesnya one. It's very good, because as you're about to see, my win condition is off of getting landfall triggers, so a lot of time I'll tutor this up, sometimes with Golos, just to be able to play it, bounce it to my hand, and keep doing that. If I have a lot of extra land drops, but not enough lands to play or no Crucible effect, I can still keep dropping this over and over again, bouncing itself to its trigger to continually trigger landfall effects. And up next, probably one of the better cards in the deck is Field of Dead. This fits well, as you'll see, coming up into my strategy of playing lands to get creatures. I have quite a few effects that do that, so I like to make a lot of tokens through playing lands, which is a great strategy. And then, as in any token deck, when you make a lot of creatures, having guys cradle around is helpful, makes a lot of mana, can help pay continually for Golos if you got a way to kill him and bring him back, and you got like 20 tokens, you can cast Golos 5 or 6 times, and just get a lot of lands out. It also helps later in the game, as I do have 2 X spells, which don't synergize great with Golos, but if you put anything more than 10 into them, you'll usually end up taking that game. So, that is the lands for the lands deck. Coming up next, I'll show you the ramp strategy. And this is how you accelerate. I don't run a ton of removal in the deck because I tend to be the aggressive deck at the table. People get pretty worried when you start playing more than 1 land a turn. In terms of artifact ramp, I only run 2, the 2 kind of really good ones. And this is because with Soul Ring or Mana Crypt on turn 1, I can end up playing a lot of things on turn 1 and 2 that really help push me over the ledge in terms of playing extra lands. Some examples of the extra land cards are Oracle of Moldiah, probably one of the better ones, get an extra land played off the top of your library. I do play 3 drop, play an additional land, or in some case 2, that you can turn 1 with Mana Crypt, which is really nice. I play in a relatively aggressive meta, so as much as it's sometimes fun just to play all the really, really big spells, sometimes you can only play a few. You do got to play some lower drops to not just lose while you're sitting there trying to play lands. Some other creatures that help me play additional lands return Mina and Den, which is great with the aforementioned Guy's Cradle, or to ensure that I can keep bouncing lands just to make my land drops. If you got a lot of tokens out, play Cradle, tap it, bounce it, play Cradle again, tap it, so on and so forth. And then Gitrog Monster, he was mentioned previously, really good with the cycle lands, also lets me play an additional land for turn. This one's really good. He tends to draw you a lot of cards. It can actually be a bit of a hindrance sometimes if you are escape shifting or sacking all your lands for some big spell. His trigger are not a May ability, so you have to do it, which is not always irrelevant. You always want to draw cards, but sometimes you shouldn't be, which happens in this deck. Just a few more additional lands per turn. We do have some enchantments, Exploration, Rites of Flourishing. Rites of Flourishing buy you some good grace with the table usually. If someone's behind, they'll be a little hesitant to swing at you maybe, or maybe they won't, but either way, other people get to capitalize on drawing the card first, but we do get to play an additional land first, and that's all that really matters. And when you're playing so many lands, extra lands a turn, being able to keep your hand full and have cards to play is important. That's why I also play Urban Evolution, and a card I've been really impressed with, Escape the Wilds. Escape the Wilds exiles the top 5 cards of your library, and you can play them until the end of your next turn. So it's a great ramp-ish spell early, lets you play an additional land, lets you play lands as well as the spells they exile. It's a great hit off of Golos activation. Urban Evolution, everyone really knows what that card does. Draw 3, play an extra land. It's not super stellar at 5. I've thought about gutting it, but... And then Exploration's great because it just gets you going early. And in a Landfall deck, the more faster you can play lands, the better you're going to be. So, showing you all the lands, showing you all the ways I play additional lands, and how fast I try and play additional lands. So now I'm going to show you some of the reasons as to why I try and play the additional lands. A lot of the landfall cards in my deck make creatures. Felidar Retreat, Rampaging Baloth, Omnath is a big one. He makes really big guys. Emeria Angel, and Scoot Swarm. These guys all make creatures combined with Field of the Dead. I have 6 cards in total that make creatures spawn landfall. If you can get 1 or 2 of them out, I only really play the ones that give you the good tokens. When I first started the deck, I did have all the ones like the white Retreat from Zendikar. I found that the cards just weren't worth it. There's like a green enchantment that makes 2/2 elementals. And with enough tutors and the amount of cards that you draw in the deck, usually having 1 of these is fine as a way to win the game. 2 is pretty cake. And Field of the Dead is the best one because you can tutor it up with your general. So you usually have a way to find at least 1 with Field of the Dead, and then you'll just want to see 1 of the others. They're all great. Scoot Swarm gets out of hand pretty fast. He has a little bit of a nombo with 1 other card that I'll be showing you shortly, but it's not too bad of a situation. When you're in that, it's you need to play it around it yourself or just ignore it and still be in really good shape. I thought for sure Felidar Retreat was going to be the landfall card that impressed me most out of the new Zendikar, but it's actually been this one, which I would say is just kind of the all-star of the deck. Valakut Exploration. I kill people with this quite a lot, and when I'm not killing people, I'm just doing damage around the table and, quite frankly, drawing a lot of cards. When you play as many additional land effects as myself, you play a land, you hit a land, you play that land out of there, you hit another card, you cast that, crack a fetch, put 2 more cards on there, play 1 of the lands. It's very, very good. And you don't lose them either. I do have a lot of times where I go big on a landfall turn, and I'll just flip my deck over, exiled to Valakut Exploration, which is dangerous. You can lose sometimes doing that, but we're chasing the dream, not the competition here. So these are the cards, and the making tokens is the important part. That is the major way that I win the game. So just a few other landfall cards that are run in the deck that don't necessarily make tokens. Given the Minotaur Warrior a try, he has been good so far. I've killed people with just Golos damage after like escape shift if they don't have blockers. Lotus Cobra, that was a card I was pretty adverse to playing. In EDH, I never thought it was really worth it. I was wrong. The card is very good, especially when you run a bunch of fetches. You can usually get Golos out on turn 3 if you turn 2 him and then play a fetch. We got Tireless Tracker and Tatiova and Horn of Greed. These are the more of the, when you play a land, you get to draw a card, whether you have to play it, a land just enters and you gain some life, or in terms of Tireless Tracker, you got to pay 2 to sack the clue. But it's never a really bad deal. I have found sometimes that I don't crack all my clues. Just 1 or 2 get you going. And it makes him a 5/5, so he's a decent blocker, because usually not swinging until you've got most creatures in play, So, next is cards that make sure you can hit landfall. And the important thing with landfall is always having lands to play. So Life from the Loam, one of the better cards in the deck as well. Get you 3 lands back from your graveyard. If you've got like 2 fetches and a cycle land in there, you're still able to draw your card even though you're dredging Life from the Loam every turn, because you can dredge it off the cycled draw and then still draw your card per turn. Get your 2 fetches. Triggered landfall. Being able to play lands from a graveyard is important, so I have 3 different types of Crucible effects. Crucible World, Ronumop Excavator, and Green Warden. Green Warden is a very good card. I saw it, thought it was going to be good, put it in the deck. It is good. And it's got Reach, which is handy for blocking flyers. But doubling up the landfall triggers, play a fetch and crack it, get 4 zombies from Field of the Dead. Very good. And last but not least, it is kind of least actually, I have Muldrotha. It only lets you play 1 land a turn, but it does let you play other creatures, so if someone blows up your Dryad of the Elysian Grove or your Wayward Swordtooth, or even some of the limited artifacts like Soul Ring or Horn of Greed, You can cast those back as well. Also another card that's probably up on the chopping block, just due to being 6 mana and already having a lot of redundancy and the effect that I want for. The next 2 cards are kind of in a funny category by themselves. They're what I do with my tokens. Divine Visitation is just a really good card, and like I said, I have 6 things that say when a land comes into play, make a token. And with the exception of Scoot Swarm, the tokens are almost always upgraded by being turned into 4/4 Flying Vigilant Angels. You don't get the bolts from the Omnath when they die, but you do get flyers, which is important. Upgrade your 1/1 flyers from Myria Angel into 4/4s. It does not work super great with Scoot Mob, or Scoot Swarm, sorry. I played Scoot Mob a lot back in the day. When you play it, the copies don't come in a Scoot Swarm, so they don't keep doubling. They just start turning into 4/4 Angels. However, if you can, get 4 Scoot Swarms, and then play it, and then every land you're playing, you're making 4/4 Vigilant Angels. That's pretty good. Finale Devastation early usually gets a Zeusa or a Ranyamop. Fetches a lot of 3-drops. But late game drawn, you can just pump as much mana as you can into it and give your zombies or your angels or your elementals, +10/+10, which is not a difficult feat to reach in a deck where you're usually playing more than 1 land a turn. And the next few cards that I'm showing are going to belong in a category that I also want to make a few changes to, but it's the go big turns. It usually has to do with a combination of cards. The first combination of cards being a way to sacrifice your lands, some number or all of them. Scapeshift, everyone's probably pretty familiar with that card. It replaces the lands from your deck, so it's really good if you got Field of the Dead still in there. Squandered Resources is a bit of a problem child. That card is very busted. Gives you mana, so you can tap, sack all your lands, tap your land for mana, then sack it for another mana. Overgrown Estate's a way to gain life from lands, sacking lands. Overlaid Terrain is a pet card. It comes into play, sacrifice all lands you control. Then it gives lands you control have tap, add 2 color of any mana to your mana pool. And a lot of people probably think, sacking your lands sounds like a pretty bad idea, with the exception of maybe Scapeshift. Well, we run a few cards that will get all of our lands back for us. And, hopefully, in the process, re-trigger Landfall for all of the lands that we have played. If I were to make some changes to the deck with a few of the cards that I mentioned cutting, I would probably add 1 more way to sacrifice all my lands, and 1 more way to get all of them back. The other one would probably be Second Sunrise, and the sack would probably be either Zern or Devastating Summons. So a lot of your big turns will go something like this. Get a Felidar Retreat, or a Valakut Exploration, or an Myria Angel in play. Tap all your mana, float, 10, 12 mana, like I said, it's not uncommon. And then either sack 10 lands to gain 30 life, sack 10 lands to make 10 mana, or play this with your floating mana. It comes into play and sacrifices all your lands, and then you'll play one of these spells to get them back. Alternatively, if you have a Crucible and like an Azusa and a Get Rog monster, you can play 4 lands a turn. You can just sack all your lands with a Crucible effect and start playing them again. A little more risky if your Crucible gets blown up or someone exiles your graveyard. But that's a way to trigger Landfall, usually 10 to 20 plus times, depending on which one of these you're using. This comes into play tapped, so usually not as big of a turn with Splendid Wreck. Face Reward, Eerie Ultimatum, very, very good cards, and a good way to trigger Landfall many, many times. And that's usually at the point where you either get wrathed out or you win the game. As you notice, a lot of the ways to sacrifice my lands were enchantments. And I have some important lands to find, as well as those spells, which are really important to find, because if you sack all your lands and can't get them back, if you get wrathed, you might be in trouble. So I do run a few tutors. Run about 6, including the finale. Idyllic and Enlightened. Idyllic puts it in your hand, so that's a great way to go get Overgrown Estate or Squandered Resources or Overlaid Terrain. Enlightened Tutor can go get any of those. It can also go get some utility enchantments and get Dryad, Rites of Flourishing, Mystic Study, Soul Ring, things of that nature. Then you have the 2 black tutors, which are just generically good. Demonic's probably the best one in the game, and Vamp Tutor is just an instant way early to set up your turn. Usually what you want to find with it is a creature that lets you play an additional land for turn, or a Crucible effect, depending on which one you haven't drawn. Lastly, it's land deck. So land tutors is good. Crop rotation, instant speed, sack land to get a land. Excuse me. You can go get Bajuka Bog at instant speed, exile the graveyard from someone who's trying to pop off. You can also go get your bounce land, or you can just trigger Landfall a bunch by sacking a land, go get an untapped fetch, crack the fetch. So that's what the tutors are good for. And then coming up on just the last parts, we got some utility and some removal. Utility-wise, I have some regrowth effects in the deck. Good to hit off of Golos. Awesome Dawn is a pretty good card in a 5-color deck. Usually gets back 2 to 3, sometimes gets back 5. 1 for each color. Regrowth's good. Eternal Witness is nice because if you can set up a turn where you swing into someone's Planeswalker or something and they block and kill your Eternal Witness, then you play your sack land ability. And you can then play your Eerie Ultimatum, getting back Eternal Witness, get your Eerie Ultimatum back again, and do it 1 additional time. I don't have any ways to sack creatures in the deck, but if you can kill it and then start your combo turn, you get an extra loop, which means a lot of extra landfalls. Yeah, Ristic Study, like I said, you're playing a lot of lands. You want to keep your hand full if you can. Ristic Study is a good way to do that early. Can also be turned 1 with Mana Crypt, which is a lot of the reason I have that in the deck. And Teferi's Protection, because I'm a big fan of Fogs, and that's the best one they've ever printed. So that's why that's in there. Sometimes you just gotta bow out. And then I have removal. In terms of like targeted, just spot removal, I have Swords, Assassin's Trophy. They're efficient. Assassin's Trophy can be used politically as well to get someone some land if they're struggling. If you run up against Winter Orbs or Unwinding Clocks or something like that, you're going to want to have a little bit of artifact removal or enchantment removal. So I have Hull Breach because it's just 2 mana. Usually get 2 things. Feels pretty good. Heliod's Intervention gains life because if you're not doing well in the deck, you usually don't have blockers and you're just kind of playing a lot of lands, and then everyone sees what you're doing and they'll attack you. So having the option to gain life is not usually relevant, but it's nice. And along with just like pumping 5 mana to destroy 3 things, it's like really good at instant speed. X-Spells aren't super great with Golos, but I do have 3 of them in the deck because I can make a lot of mana. Just some other generic removal that I run. Casualties of War, really like that card. And it's artifact, creature, enchantment, land, and planeswalker removal. So, really good hit off of Golos. I do want to run 1 Wrath, even though I'm usually the aggressor. Blasphemous Act. I've just found that I really like that one. And it does get you in trouble sometimes because it doesn't kill everything if something's bigger than that. But it being usually 1 to 4 mana to cast is worth that cost. And finally, that's the removal. And then the last 2 cards I have are just generic big X spells. With Cradle, with making a lot of tokens, just playing a lot of giant lands in general, you do get a lot of mana. So these are just awful hits off of Golos if you're activating him. However, anything more than 10 in the Genesis wave, and I would say probably 10 to 15 in Torment of Hailfire, which is easily achievable. It's usually a pretty good way to get the game ended or at least going in your favor. Anything over 10 with Genesis Wave, you hit so many lands and landfall triggers and stuff that brings all your lands back and everything like that. It's pretty difficult not to be in a position to win at that point. I don't have anything that gives haste in the deck, so you do still kind of get waylaid by Wraths from time to time. But if you got Valakut Exploration out, Wraths don't matter. You just play 20 lands twice, or have a Green Warden in play, and exile your deck, and then 40 everybody. So that's been my Golos lands deck. It's my strategy. It's kind of a unique take on them. I'm sure other people do something similar. But that's how he rolls. So thank you very much for watching. Have a good day.